Starting a business can be daunting, and the initial startup years can be very risky and hard. Purchasing a franchise in a hot, up-and-coming trend can really help you accelerate your earning potential by providing you a proven system right out of the gate. If you have ever wanted to start your own business and ever thought about owning a franchise, our guest today is the next person you should call. Diane Pleuss is a franchise business consultant and a career transition specialist with FranChoice, and she's been focused on helping others find their perfect franchise fit since 2004. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Diane, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here today to talk about franchising.
Yeah, happy to have you. And as we had just talked about before we got on, I am in franchising myself with CertaPro Painters. We have lots of common contacts and can't wait to get into it with you. If you could start by sharing with us how you came to be in the world of franchising and some of what you do today.
Sure. It was totally serendipity. Many years ago, my husband took a job in California, so I was the trailing spouse. Previous to that, he had been home with our young daughter and I worked. And when we came to California, I could have continued with my existing company and transferred out here, but I wanted to do something different. I answered one newspaper ad back in those days for a marketing director for a franchise development company, and I was hired. That's how I initially got into franchising. And that position morphed into being marketing director for a franchise company, for a packaging and shipping company, which morphed into being invited to join FranChoice. And that was 16 years ago.
And I saw from your LinkedIn profile, you've been with FranChoice almost 17 years. Is that right?
Yes. In November will be 17 years. I recognize a good thing when I see one, and the people are outstanding. The organization is stellar. I couldn't think of a better company to be associated with.
That's great. Tell us about what FranChoice does as a company with and for entrepreneurs, and then a little bit more about what your role is, and then we'll kind of dig in from there.
Sure. FranChoice vets and pre-screens the companies that we work with. So we don't work with every company. My role as an independent franchise consultant is to work with that candidate to match them up to what I call best fit franchise companies, ones that would match their goals, their skills, their interests, their investment level. I like to introduce several companies to them, usually 3, so they can compare and contrast. And then I will coach and guide them through that franchise investigation process. So at the end, they're making a well-educated business decision, whether that's a yes or a no.
What's the typical work history of an entrepreneur that's interested in franchising to begin with?
The work history can vary quite a bit. It could range from that person who is, we'll just categorize them as 50 plus and downsized. Usually they don't necessarily want to go back to the corporate world at that stage. They have experience, they have some resources, and they're concerned that they could be downsized again in a few years. So why not put all that background to use in their own business to benefit themselves and their family? So on one end of the spectrum, we have people with great deal of experience and depth. On the other hand, we have what I call the plug and play entrepreneurs who may not have that depth of corporate experience, but bring that can-do attitude, and they want a business for themselves, but they don't have that big idea. And they just want that business model, that toolbox, so to speak. And they say, give me that toolbox and let me go, and I will follow that system. So that range can vary. And one thing that's interesting is there is no direct correlation between your educational level and your success level. So just because someone might have an MBA from a prestigious organization doesn't mean that they're going to be more successful than someone that has a GED.
What would you say would be a couple of discriminating factors towards success level? If it's not education level, what is it?
I believe it's that can-do attitude. the person who has that ready and willing mind, the person who is coachable, who says, I've got skills, but I'd like to hone them more. And I want to learn how you do it and improve and embrace best practices and continue to grow my business.
And do you track after you place a candidate with a franchisor? Do you track their level of success?
I certainly try to. What I like or what I appreciate is when franchise companies call after a convention and they'll say, hey, Diane, remember Bob? Well, Bob was Rookie of the Year, or Bob was in the President's Club again. You might want to call him and congratulate him, which I love hearing that. I will admit that sometimes when I place people, they are busy in their business, and I try to stay in touch. And I have to share this one story with you. So I placed one person who was a CPA and had partnered with an anesthesiologist, so very busy. And I had done my follow-up, how was training, how was business going, and hadn't heard anything. And that year I sent wreaths for Christmas to all the people I had placed. And I just do that. And after he received his wreath, he called me and said, I'm so sorry. He said, I know you've called to see how I'm doing, and I'm doing fine. I've just been busy.
Love it. Do you disqualify people? Have you had to have a conversation with some entrepreneurs and say, I don't think you're a fit to be a franchise owner? And if you have done that, on what basis?
Yes, I have had that difficult conversation. I think people do appreciate it. Many times, as we're talking about who is right to be an entrepreneur or a franchisee, they will raise questions themselves. They have concerns, and many times they can determine that themselves. They may not be financially qualified, which makes it an easy discussion then. And I've had people come back and a year or two later and say, we have saved up money. So you might, again, chuckle at this. Probably 2 weeks ago, I had a person, and I did not remember him. He came back to me after 11 years. 11 years ago, we had chatted, and he was not in a position. And since then, he opened up a restaurant. He's done well. He's financially qualified now. He has business experience. Since that time, he's also got married. He has 3 kids. And he said, I'm working nights and weekends, and I don't have a life. And he said, you probably don't remember me, but I'm back.
Have you ever told entrepreneurs you're not fit to be a franchise owner? What I heard was you have, and some of that comes down to financial qualification. I know one thing some people have said about franchising is if you have a check, they'll just take a warm body, right? Like you just have to have enough money. Are there other reasons in addition to financial qualification that you've had to have that tough conversation with entrepreneurs to say, you have enough money, but...
I believe you have to have certain people skills. You have to have some business savvy and acumen. You ideally should know how to read some financial statements. Certainly that can be taught. But again, what I call that fire in the belly. If the person doesn't have that, I think then it's very difficult. Or if their spouse is not supportive. I worked with one couple, and the woman was just not on board, but she agreed to be on every call, and she agreed to listen and not torpedo things. And it wasn't until they went to confirmation day at the very end that she said on that call, now I get it. I just couldn't understand why my husband couldn't just be happy. We had everything else in place. We had a nice home. Our family was doing well. We had good neighbors. Why couldn't he just be happy if the job wasn't great? And she said, now I get it. So that's another component. You need
the short list I just got from you that I love it is, hey, we need somebody who's financially qualified. You got to have some people skills. You got to have some business acumen. You need to have some financial acumen other than just having the money. You got to have just some determination and fire in your belly for it. Yeah. And you need a supportive family, including a supportive spouse. Yeah. Is there anything different as you see it about that as a profile for a franchisee versus a profile of what we might say simply an entrepreneur who's not a franchisee? Are the qualifications as you see it, how are they similar or different for a franchise owner versus somebody who wants to go out on their own?
There certainly are similarities. One factor might be that why. Why does a person want to do it? And that's very helpful to understand. And knowing that why, I can help that person see if a franchise would be a vehicle to get them to where they want to go, whether that's financial stability or more flexibility or a lifestyle. When I think of that independent business owner, I think, and maybe this is a stereotype, but I think of a person who has a broad range of skills, and they might even be that Renaissance person that they can do many things. And I think of the candidate for a franchise as someone who appreciates having that infrastructure, that they don't have to create all of these things, that they value time and say, this is great. You've done the research, you've honed and refined, and I appreciate it. And I can use it. I can embrace and adapt it. I don't have to continue tweak, or I didn't have to create it.
Yeah, Diane, I think, as I think about it, I have a bunch of questions that relate to even market conditions, like what has happened to franchising through COVID and a few other things. But I want to stay on this subject just for a second. Startups are hard. Creating a startup of a business model, whether it be a restaurant or any other type of business where you got to create your own processes, you got to come up with all these different things. There's like a speed to market issue that I think is a difference between starting your own business as an entrepreneur versus a franchise, and how much you can scale and how quickly you can scale. Does that play a big factor as well? I mean, or do entrepreneurs selfishly not realize that, and they think, I want to do my own thing, and they kind of go the startup route and not realize how hard it actually is?
Well, I've worked with people, let's say in two categories. I've worked with people who've done their own businesses and they've been very proud of it and they've been successful and they sold them. And then they came to me and said, now we'd like a franchise. And I'm a little concerned because are they going to fit, or might they feel confined, so to speak? I try to feel out those edges.
Yep.
And what I've heard from them is, I did it. It was successful, but man, did I work hard. And for my next business, I would like a little easier start.
Yeah. As you say that, I'm going to just speak personally and selfishly. I think in my entrepreneurial career, I've been a startup guy. I love startups. I love, let's get the milk crates. Let's all sit around until we figure out how to generate revenue and create the processes. Yeah. And now when you look at kind of you're in your mid-career, if you will, and you have a family and you have kids, the concept of doing a startup right now is kind of daunting. It's like, oh my gosh, it's going to take 3 to 4 years before we figure this thing out. I don't have that kind of time. Whereas a franchise is like a quick start, right? And can kind of get you up and running. So it's probably not dissimilar to your market clientele. You're probably not getting 20 somethings as your most viable client looking to buy franchises. Mostly probably people in their mid-careers. Is that fair?
It is a fair assessment. Yes, people have had some success. They've gained confidence. And they say, I could do this myself with a little bit of training and support and help. And also that network of franchisees is also incredibly helpful and important.
Yeah,
it's not only corporate, it's your fellow franchisees that are wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go to the current, or excuse me, let me scratch that because that could be a political statement. The pandemic we've experienced in the past year and a half or so. What did that do to franchising? Because in one sense, I kind of think more people were probably like, look, I'm going to go work for myself versus work for a corporate job that may just lay me off during a pandemic. On the same token, how do you assess and evaluate franchises during a pandemic and learn more about the franchisor and things like that? So what have you experienced from just a market perspective? This is an economy podcast, but what have you seen from your lens in terms of the growth, decline, stableness of people wanting to own franchises?
Sure. Well, I think the news tends to focus on restaurants and fast food, which is natural because they're so prevalent and they have the blinking lights on the side of the road.
Yep.
But if we look at those businesses that are deemed essential services, those many times have done surprisingly well.
Yep.
But no one really wants to tout that because some other people have struggled. So you don't want to say, oh, I've done great. Yep. But yet, when you talk to some of the franchise companies in the essential services space and see what they have done for their franchisees and how they've risen to the occasion and the additional support and things that they did, I am so proud of so many of our franchise partners. For example, some of our senior care franchise partners. And this isn't the senior care facility, but the business model where you're working out of a small office and you're hiring caregivers and the caregivers provide the care.
Yeah.
Well, some of those companies, from their experience, they saw through the pandemic that their franchisees and their caregivers were going to need that protective equipment. So they went out and sourced it. They bought the gloves, they bought the masks, they had them shipped to corporate. They would hold packaging and shipping parties to ship it out to their franchisees. They said, we want you taking care of your customers, taking care of your employees. We don't want you trying to source gloves. And are they going to be the quality? Or are you going to get a box of rocks? And so we're just going to do that. And other companies hired someone just to help their franchisees maneuver and fill out the forms for the PPP and the EIDL programs, because they said, again, we want you to focus on your business. So some of these things, the franchisors really rose to the occasion. And with other businesses that were home-based, such as your painting franchises, your window coverings, flooring, insulation, lawn care, pool care, pet care, all of those, since people were home, they're saying, maybe we need to improve this, but they don't have the tools, they don't have the skills. Or they go to the hardware store and they go, who knew there were so many different options here? I'm going to call a handyman and get it done right. So those home service businesses have actually thrived during this time. And certainly in March and April last year and May, yes, everyone was hit and it was a concern. But those are some of the industries and companies that did bounce back very quickly.
Sure. So I think you're speaking a little bit to the franchises that are in existence and how well they may or may not have performed, essential businesses, home care for sure, home services. But if you take that maybe a level deeper, what about new franchise sales? So if I'm just using an example, but if X million new franchise sales were made in 2018 and then 2019. In 2020, did that dip because people were like, I'm not interested in buying a franchise right now. I just got to take care of my business and my house or my household. Or was it the opposite, which is I just lost my job. I might as well go start a franchise. What did we see in terms of growth, decline, or evenness on new franchise sales from between new franchisees and franchisors?
Okay. Well, certainly when the pandemic hit, there was a dip. And it was so unpredictable. And there's always fear. We're always talking about fear going forward, fear of that unknown. So certainly then people hit the pause button and they said, let's pause this. And many of the people came back. Not everyone did, but other people, as you said, were downsized, or they experienced a certain level of freedom and flexibility by being able to work at home and doing their job, and recognizing that they now have some other options, or if they were downsized, they're looking at things in a whole new light. So I think a lot of people are reviewing their life situation, particularly if they have young kids, if they have childcare issues, if they're doing Zoom school, they may need more flexibility than what they had before.
Gotcha. Yeah, this kind of brings, we talked a little bit about what are the characteristics of a successful franchisee. Let's flip that. What are the successful characteristics of a successful franchisor? Like, think about the top franchisors you have ever worked with. What do they bring to the table that separates them from everybody else? Forget about the industry, just what they do as a franchisor.
First of all, they have a strong business model. So whatever they based it on, that initial business was strong, was solid. They continue to improve it. They continue to refine it. They are looking for things to bring to the table to continue to add value. They recognize that partnership with the franchisee is truly a partnership, and it should be a win-win for both. They listen to their franchisees. They welcome input. I think, that open communication, we know that's a basic, but yet that's the foundation. We know that there are what I would call both high road and low road companies in any industry, in any space. And we try to work with those high road companies that continue to want to reinvest back into the company and continue to help franchisees, continue to provide platforms to share best practices, continue to innovate, to take that pool of money and really get the most out of it.
I'm curious when you say on the high road and low road companies, and I think that's accurate. That's with any industry. How do you identify a low road franchisor that you don't really want to work with? How would you identify that?
Their franchisees probably aren't happy. They probably aren't making money. If you were to ask them, would you do it again? They might not say yes. They might say no. Those are some pretty big clues. They may accept anyone to be a franchisee. They may not have qualifications other than can they write that check. Really, through doing what we call a validation, where you're talking to existing and past franchisees, you can get an idea of the training, support, the infrastructure that a company brings and the results, the seeds that they show.
And do you help prospective franchise owners? Do you have a question list that you provide them, or a checklist, or do you encourage them to make their own on asking questions like this?
I do. I have questions that I provide. I have a Word document, a couple pages of questions to ask, and I recommend that candidates start with the easy questions first about training and support. I recommend that they share a little bit about themselves, of where they're coming from and why they're looking at the business and why they're looking at this particular business. If they open up the kimono, so to speak, that other person is more likely to. But certainly they do want to talk with that franchise owner. They want to have a candid discussion. They want them to be honest. Many times people come back and they'll say, I can't believe what they told me. And not every company is perfect. And they'll say, yeah, they shared this, but it's not a roadblock. I understand, and we're dealing with that. So what I find with asking questions is the magic is asking that follow-up question. So you ask that first question and you listen to the answer, and then probably much like you do with interviews or things that you're doing here today, you ask that follow-up question to really get into the heart of the matter.
Gosh, and that Word document, and you said it's a couple of pages long.
Yes.
And I'm sure after 17 years, you contributed to the development of it, or it's yours.
Right.
So you wrote that from a perspective of here's what a possible franchise owner may want to ask of a franchisor. I can see that same Word document being valuable for any entrepreneur on what is going to be valuable in terms of your business when you're looking to exit and you're looking to sell. Because I would imagine, I just want to bump this up against you. Isn't it? And you're in the franchising business. You're not in the entrepreneur and exit strategy business, but I'm just curious as to your perspective on that same list that franchise owners ask franchisors, or potential franchise owners ask franchisors. Would it be a similar list that someone who's buying a business from an entrepreneur may want to ask?
I would think there would be a lot of similarities. Yes, you want to look at that. You certainly have more evidence there. One of my friends is selling his franchise business, and he's very proud of what he's done and established. And he listed how many 5-star reviews he has. And he listed how many followers he had on social media, because he has developed that and he's proud of that. And that's an asset that will help with that sales price and allow that person, again, to step in much easier into a thriving business.
How much of your business do you work with resales versus new territory?
Certainly, if there's a resale available, I will present it as an option. And occasionally, I might even or have even presented a candidate with a company that I thought was a great fit. And they had one territory available that was new, and right next door, they had a resale. So sometimes we have compared a new and a resale right alongside. And again, whichever is going to be the best for that person, and looked at it that way.
Well, I want to go back and correct myself that I was wrong when I said you're not in the business of the exits, because if you're doing resales, you're talking to the people who are exiting also. You're on both sides of it. You're kind of representing the seller and you're representing the buyer. How do you play that middle ground in a neutral way?
Well, it's I wouldn't say that we work with matching people. Again, I'm that franchise fitter, matching candidates. And if the best match is a new option, I will present that. If there's a resale available, I will present that. So if an existing franchisee has a business for sale, they will contact their franchise development department and say, I would like to list my business for sale, so that when people like Diane call and say, do you have territory available? They can say, yes, we have this existing business for sale. And then they can give me the information on that existing business.
Thanks for that clarification. I'm curious for our entrepreneurs who are listening, who are not interested in being a franchise owner, but maybe they're interested in franchising themselves. They've built up what they believe to be a good enough thing that they might like to be a franchisor. What words would you have for them?
I would make sure that they have a solid business to start. And when they go into franchising, they're going into another business, so to speak. They're leaving their restaurant or their painting business and are now in the business of supporting franchisees and onboarding them. Certainly, there are companies that specialize in that help with the training manuals, finding franchise candidates, developing the system, having that IT platform and the infrastructure and the websites. Recognize that there's a lot more involved than what it looks like. And to look at that, start talking to a franchise attorney or companies that specialize in this to fully understand there can be opportunity there, and new franchises come on board every single year. But it's not a gimme, it's not a lay down or an automatic.
I think that's a powerful distinction to acknowledge. You're going from running that business to running the business of teaching people to run the business.
Yeah. Yes. And sometimes if we look at maybe the derogatory term is babysitting. So sometimes, it's like having teenagers. You give advice, but it's not always taken. And then they hit a certain level of maturity and appreciate it. So you just have to realize that starting out, the franchisee is like that young child, and you're teaching them everything, and you're so proud of what you developed, and you can show them the way. But yet, not everyone stays in that category, and sometimes you've got some struggles as well. So you have to be prepared for that too.
Diane, you had mentioned earlier when we were talking about, some successful franchise concepts of the last year or two: essential business, home care, home services. Are there any franchise concepts that have come up over the past couple of years that are so unique, but they don't fall in those categories, that you find particularly interesting as we head into the future here?
That's a very interesting question, in that, yes, there are franchises that are coming on board that you think, the world of franchising is broad and every industry must already be franchised. And yet, if we look at the past year or two, we've had franchises that have developed. So we have roofing franchises, we have insulation franchises, irrigation franchises, nail salons. These are businesses that previously had just been done independently, mom and pops. And all of a sudden, someone said, oh, we could develop a national brand. There's an opening. And with system and infrastructure and buying power, we could go in, we could have an HVAC business, we could have plumbing or electrical. Now, these aren't sexy businesses, but they certainly do well. Usually the investment is lower, the margins are great, the hours tend to be pretty decent, traditional business hours, usually no nights, holidays, or weekends. And all of a sudden you start looking at that and you say, this is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot in that category, and I would have never thought of any of those categories that I mentioned. Or when you think of pool services, that's just going off the charts right now. Or
Wow.
tutoring. So some of these are just unexpected, but new businesses continue to pop up because there's a need, and there's successful independents that are doing them and executing well and want to provide that opportunity.
So, that's very interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. We've had a few times in this episode the concept of the riches are in the niches.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like what you're talking about is the evolution of franchising isn't just to have a general business, but it's, if you get very, very, very specific, there's a demand for it. Like, I know, specifically to your point, you mentioned insulation or pool service. I mean, we can't get someone to come service our pool, save our lives. But the only people that service pool in our areas are the companies that make pools. And they tell you, well, if we didn't build your pool, we can't service it. And we're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get service? So, the riches are in the niches keeps coming up over and over again. So I love the fact that you're seeing that trend. And it made me think about, there's entrepreneurs who want to buy a franchise because they want to operate a franchise.
Right.
Yet I've read, several different articles over the past years that, Shaquille O'Neal owns like 300 franchises. I'm sure he doesn't operate them, but they're part of a group that goes around and just buys a bunch of franchises. I think he owns a bunch of like Five Guys franchises as an example. What about the opportunity for entrepreneurs that want to deploy capital in the franchising industry, but don't necessarily want to go operate as a lifestyle, but they want to own a bunch of franchises? Like, the idea of owning a pool service franchise in my market sounds very attractive to me. There's a need. I don't want to operate it.
Right.
What would you say to entrepreneurs who want to be more on the capital side of franchising as opposed to operation?
Sure. And that exists as well. What we've seen certainly in the restaurant industry is a lot of the restaurants are owned by groups. So if you walk into a fast food restaurant, you'll see the little sign by the side of the door that says that this restaurant is managed by this management group. So certainly in that industry, there has been a lot of consolidation. And some of the biggest players will own 400 plus of one concept, 300 plus of another concept, 200 plus of another. So they have massive infrastructure and economies of scale. If we look at other businesses that are more manager run, those could be in certain other industries. So, for example, that could be in your office suites or in your suites where you divide up real estate and lease them out to hairstylists or massage therapists. And those are more of the manager-run businesses. And we're seeing a lot of people look at that because they can use capital once they do the build out and it's fully leased. It's really a pretty nice revenue stream. So there are certainly those options as well. And part of what I do as a franchise consultant is chat with that person to find out their level of involvement. Do they want to be the artisan in the business? Do they want to grow and scale it? And how many employees do they want to have? Or do they want to really manage that manager or be that empire builder and start with a 3-pack, a 5-pack, a 10-pack and grow it to 10 and build generational wealth and be able to hand it down to family? So that's part of the questions that I will ask that investigation.
Well, it's obvious your heart is in what you do, and you've certainly invested your career in it. And you've spoken very highly and very well about the franchise community and being the matchmaker that you are with it. And we really appreciate your time coming on today and sharing with our entrepreneur audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I look at people, and before I got into franchising, I thought a franchisee had to be this superhero. They had to be Wonder Woman or Superman. And I didn't realize it really can be Joe or Jane average, but that person that has confidence in themselves and wants something more. And I think too many times we shortchange ourselves, and we could look at other options and we could do more and be more. And franchising can be one avenue to look at that. So if I can help someone evaluate that, that's what I enjoy doing.
That's inspiring. Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
Rich, we've been in the franchising industry for many, many years. You specifically, most of your career has been in the franchising world. And, we've certainly seen great franchisees, not so great franchisees, great franchisors, not so great franchisors. What do you think makes the difference on both of those? What makes a great franchisee and a not so great franchisee? And what makes a great franchisor and a not so great franchisor from your perspective compared to Diane's?
I think great franchisees blend the power of the system they've been taught with their own sense of entrepreneurialism. I literally think if franchisees did everything the franchisor said, I'm not sure things would actually work out well. I think they have to do some things that the franchisor is not saying that are unique to their market or territory, that are unique to their personality, their skill set, the people who they're leading, their particular customer base, where they are on cash flow. And that's why, as far as I know, most or all franchisors have a field staff. We call them general managers who work with a franchisee to help customize the system to them. On the franchisor side, I think Diane nailed it. I'll go back to some of the things that she had said of having a strong business model, constantly improving that business model, adding value back to the franchisees instead of just taking a royalty and sitting on that, having win-win with the franchisees, welcoming input, sharing of best practices. I really think Diane summarized it best, and we didn't highlight it on the podcast, but I think she summarized it best when she said something to the effect of corporate and a network of franchise owners.
Yeah.
If you're going to get into franchising, which is an entrepreneurial venture, or select to not get into franchising and just open a business, what franchising offers at just opening a business does not is that there's a corporate entity who is constantly working in the background for your benefit, delivering value in a win-win way. And there's a network of franchise owners who are running the same business you are, just in a different market. And the better franchisors do both of those better, innovate better, provide more value to franchisees, and connect their franchisees with each other to share and distribute best practices among themselves.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting because, to answer the question myself, because that's where you would ask me next.
Yeah.
I think that the definition for me of a franchisee that's going to be successful, they want to have to be part of a team. Together, everyone achieves more. If you're going to be a maverick, which would to me is a characteristic of what's going to not make you a very successful franchise, just go do your own startup, control your own process, create everything yourself from scratch because you control it. You want to do it your way. There's a purpose for a business system. If you're going to go into a franchise and not follow the business system, you are going to fail. I don't care how good you are as an entrepreneur. They create a system for a reason. And if you want to follow a system and you want to have colleagues in terms of other franchisees, you're sharing best practices. Like I know, one of the things that you guys do a lot in your franchise group is the franchisees get together and they share their experiences and their stories, and they love doing that. That's what makes them very successful in what they do. That's on one side. And on the franchisor side, what I've seen is there are certain franchisors who are committed to ensuring the success of their franchisees. They want to see them make the goals and the money, and they put stuff, people, systems, resources around them to help them succeed, because they know if they have a successful entrepreneur out of the gate their first few years, they will be there for a long journey, versus other ones who are just looking to sell a franchise, see if it works or not, doesn't matter, go out there and fight or flight, whatever, it doesn't matter, we just sold another franchise, right? That makes the difference to me on that other side.
Well, and that was some of my question in the beginning of the podcast was like, so other than having money, like what else do you do at FranChoice to be able to qualify people? Because it's not just about writing the check, it's about placing someone who can ultimately be successful. I did think it was interesting, and I repeated it back on the podcast, but I'll do it again, is when she talked about an entrepreneur who's thinking about being a franchisor, because I think our entrepreneur listeners, some of them tinker in the idea of, is there somebody else who I can teach them what I do? And then can I charge a royalty for teaching them my system and ultimately be a franchisor? I think it was really a key distinction for her is you've got to be willing to switch businesses. You're switching the business of running your business to the business of supporting franchisees running their business. It's a totally different business, which is the onboarding and the training and the support and the retention efforts and the operating efforts. Like there's an entire infrastructure that goes along with that. It's not as easy as just, I'll get another location and somebody buy in if you want to be more than a 2 or 3 location business.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think, you need to really, she highlighted, well, what are the characteristics of successful franchisees? I think that's also those characteristics of a very successful entrepreneur, but you have to have that, I want to go get it, that can-do attitude is so critical to entrepreneurism and being successful. So I love that part of it. And the last piece I'll share with you that I really loved hearing was how niche franchises are becoming and how that is really kind of a key trend in franchising. And I love that idea, like really like the example of insulation franchises. There's garage door flooring franchises now. I mean, that's a small niche business. We're not going to do flooring across your whole house. We just do garage doors, like sorry, not garage doors, garage flooring. That's very, very, very specific. Or pool services, like she talked about. So I found those to be very, very interesting and interesting to see where the franchising world goes with all these different concepts.
I'm curious on your take, as you were saying, hey, the things she was mentioning about a successful franchisee, it simply makes a successful entrepreneur. She talked about the fire in the belly. And when I think of somebody who has fire in the belly when they get a business started, honestly, I think of you. Can you speak to your experience? What is that fire in the belly that you've had that has driven you to develop successful businesses?
I think it's the perseverance factor that you are not going to stop until you succeed. And I'll bring that all the way back to our roots, Rich. With College Pro Painters, where you and I were both franchisees while we were in college.
Yeah.
We had a lot of colleagues that were franchisees that weren't successful. But the reason they weren't successful is they weren't willing to persevere through the no's. They weren't willing to go knock on 10 more doors that day after they got done their day, right? They weren't willing to go through the tough times to figure it out to get to the other side. That perseverance, once you learn as an entrepreneur that you can go through anything, if you have that perseverance and that can-do attitude, and I'm going to just keep going till I succeed in this thing, you cross this chasm, if you will, that I can do anything. I can succeed at this. And once you get that, what's the statistic? Like X% out of 10 businesses fail. The reason why is perseverance. And so that has really been the key for me. Once I realized that if I could set goals, I can do it, but there's going to be peaks and valleys along the way, that learning curve that you and I have always talked about over the years. When you get in that crisis of meaning, do you keep going through? Do you have the fundamental ability to just plow through it to get to the other side? That has really been a key for me that we learned 25 plus years ago.
Yeah, you'd mentioned perseverance, which I do not disagree with that word. But the thing that when we were general managers interviewed for, when we looked for franchisees, what we tested for was tenacity.
Tenacity, yeah.
The ability to keep going in light of failure. Are you going to keep pushing? Are you going to be relentless? Are you going to have the attitude you just mentioned, which is, I'm not going to fail. I will figure it out. I don't care what I have to do. I will figure it out. I need a little bit of leadership where franchising can come in. I need a little bit of leadership on what to do. But man, you tell me what to do and I can figure out what to do. This isn't going to fail. And that confidence in the fire in the belly in that.